So what if literally every single fundamental constant you learned about in your university physics courses, like the exact speed of light, the mass of an electron, Planck's constant, even gravity itself, what if all of it was just entirely wrong?
Right, and not just slightly miscalculated,
Right.
by a fraction of a decimal point,
Yeah, exactly.
but fundamentally, philosophically, an illusion.
It's wild to think about.
Yeah.
Today, we are basically pulling up the floorboards of reality for you. We're looking at this new paradigm that suggests the entire bedrock of standard physics is essentially a user interface.
A highly convincing projection.
Right, a projection that totally hides the actual mathematical source code running the universe.
It is a staggering premise, honestly. I mean, we spend hundreds of years building the standard model of particle physics and general relativity, mapping out these incredibly precise numbers to describe how the universe behaves.
Decades and decades of work.
Yeah, and then a document comes along and boldly asserts that measuring behavior isn't the same as understanding origin.
Which brings us to the actual focus of today's deep dive. We are exploring a massively dense, really radically alternative physics manuscript from 2025.
Written by George James Dukas.
Right, and it's titled TDUFT Photoelectric Effect Report, with the subtitle Radical Revision.
And just for context for you listening, TDUFT stands for Transdimensional Unified Field Theory.
Yeah, Transdimensional Unified Field Theory. And we are going to look at a complete ground-up reimagining of one of the most famous, untouchable pieces of physics in human history.
Albert Einstein's Nobel Prize-winning work on the photoelectric effect.
Yep. But before we cross this threshold, we really need to establish some operational boundaries for this analysis.
Yeah, that's crucial. Our goal today is not to peer review the mathematics, nor are we here to mount a defense of Einstein or tear down the standard model.
We're neutral observers here.
Exactly. We are exploring this text as an architectural blueprint. We're essentially walking through the rooms of this proposed theoretical universe to understand its plumbing, its foundation, and, well, its central provocative claim.
Which is that the universe does not run on measured empirical constants, but on pure derivable geometry.
Pure math.
Right. So we are mapping the architecture of an entirely different cosmos. And the first thing this architect, Dukas, does is point a massive spotlight at the cracks in the current foundation of physics.
Right, because if you are going to rewrite Einstein, you first have to articulate why the current wildly successful model of physics is fundamentally broken.
You have to prove why it needs fixing in the first place.
Exactly. And the critique centers on a concept that physicists usually just accept as this uncomfortable necessity.
The fundamental constants.
Right. The standard model of particle physics and cosmology relies on over 26 of these numbers.
And these are the heavy hitters, right? The speed of light, c, Planck's constant, h, the gravitational constant, g, the fine structure constant.
Yeah, all the big ones. And if you corner a physicist today and ask, why is the speed of light exactly 299,792,458 meters per second?
Like, why not around 300 million?
Or why not 10 meters per second? The honest answer is always, because we measured it and the universe just happened to be calibrated that way.
It just is what it is.
Right. There is zero theoretical derivation from first principles. The manuscript actually refers to these numbers as having no structural origin.
So they're just empirical patches.
Yeah, exactly. We observe them, we measure them, and we plug them into our equations just to make the math balance out.
It's kind of like imagine a software developer hard-coding magic numbers into a physics engine for a video game.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. Like the developer realizes the digital cars are floating away off the track, so they just type gravity equals 9.8 into the code to force the cars to stay on the road.
Just forcing it to work.
Yeah, and the code works. The cars drive normally, but the number 9.8 is completely arbitrary. It doesn't emerge from the logic of the code itself. It was just jammed in from the outside.
And that is the exact frustration the TDUFT paper highlights. The author looks at Einstein's photoelectric equation,
where the maximum kinetic energy of an ejected electron equals Planck's constant times the frequency of the light minus the work function.
Right, that one. And the paper calls this a non-generative, surface-level empirical description.
Non-generative. Okay, I really want to visualize this critique for you, the listener, because it's so central to everything that follows in this deep dive.
Go for it.
Imagine a master chef trying to reverse engineer a highly complex, multi-layered cake purely by how it tastes.
Okay.
The chef takes a bite and notes, the exact level of sweetness, the specific fluffiness of the sponge, the density of the frosting.
They're measuring the output.
Exactly. They write down this meticulous, mathematically perfect formula describing the final taste of the cake. But they have absolutely no idea what flour was used, they don't know the chemical reaction happening between the baking powder and the heat, and they don't know the temperature of the oven.
They just have the final result.
Right. According to Dukas, Einstein basically wrote down a flawless formula for the taste of the cake, but totally missed the underlying chemistry that baked it in the first place.
That captures the philosophical divide perfectly, honestly. Because TDUFT doesn't claim Einstein's math fails at a descriptive level.
The math works.
Right. The equation perfectly balances the energy book between photons and electrons. The critique is that Einstein merely measured the shadows on the wall and proclaimed it a fundamental law.
He used a measured constant, Planck's constant.
Yes, and an empirical material property, the work function.
Just to force the equation to match the observation.
Exactly. And TDUFT demands an infinitely higher standard. It insists that a true ultimate theory of reality must possess exactly 0 free parameters.
0.
Absolutely everything must generate itself organically from a single geometric operator architecture.
Okay, but let's play defense for standard physics for just a second here.
Sure.
Einstein won a Nobel Prize for this specific equation because it solved a massive crisis in physics at the time. I mean, it successfully predicted the threshold frequency required to eject electrons, which proved that light interacts in quantized packets, or photons.
It was a massive breakthrough.
Right. So is it entirely fair for this paper to dismiss it as a non-generative shadow when it objectively works in every single laboratory on Earth?
Well, the manuscript actually anticipates that exact defense. Its stance is that working in a laboratory setting is the baseline for physics, but it is not the ceiling for truth.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it.
Right. Describing an energy balance empirically is not the same as explaining the mechanism of why mass and energy interact at that precise boundary.
So it's the difference between the what and the why.
Exactly. And the text takes a very aggressive stance here, directly comparing the Standard Model's reliance on empirical constants to the current state of string theory.
Ah, string theory, which has been the supposed theory of everything for decades now, though it is notoriously stalled out.
Stalled out completely. And TDUFT weaponizes that stagnation. String theory mathematically allows for something like 10 to the power of 500 different possible vacuums.
Which means 10 to the 500 different possible universes.
Right. And the manuscript dismisses this as an unfalsifiable landscape. If your theoretical framework is so loose that it can accommodate 10 to the 500 different realities.
It's meaningless.
Yeah, or if it requires you to manually inject 26 arbitrary numbers you just found on a measuring tape just to function, it isn't a fundamental theory of reality.
It's just a highly sophisticated curve-fitting exercise.
Exactly.
So it's the ultimate descriptive model, but a generative failure.
Yes.
Wow. So TDUFT is demanding the literal source code. It wants to start with a blank mathematical canvas, input 0 measured physical constants, and watch the exact universe down to the precise speed of light generate itself purely from geometric logic.
From pure geometry. Which forces us to look at the actual foundation the author provides. I mean, if Einstein merely gave us the taste of the cake, what is the underlying chemistry according to TDUFT?
Right, let's get into the recipe.
So the text provides a framework it calls the TDLOEs.
The transdimensional lattice operator equations.
Exactly. And there is a very deliberate structural choice in the manuscript here. Dukas places this massive, universe-spanning framework at the very beginning of the paper, well before he even mentions the photoelectric effect.
Which makes sense structurally, because if the paper opened with a critique of the photoelectric effect and just offered a tweaked equation, it would read like, just an incremental adjustment to Einstein.
It would get lost in the weeds. By leading with the TDLOEs, the author establishes a towering, comprehensive mathematical backbone first.
So the photoelectric effect is eventually presented not as a foundational law of nature, but as a tiny downstream secondary manifestation of this giant transdimensional lattice.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's build this lattice. The manuscript describes the universe as a recursive, structured grid possessing dimensional tiers, which it labels D1 all the way up to D8.
And we really need to discard any sci-fi notions of parallel universes or multiverses when we hear the word dimensions in this context.
Right. No portals to a universe where we all had evil goatees.
Yeah, exactly. These are structural, functional layers of a single unified reality. And the entire communication system, the governing logic passing between these dimensional tiers, is anchored to one of the most ancient mathematical concepts known to humanity.
The golden ratio.
Yes.
Roughly 1.618. I mean, we see this everywhere in classical aesthetics and biology, right? The spiral of a galaxy, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, the proportions of the Parthenon.
It's everywhere.
It's a beautiful number, but usually physics treats it as an emergent aesthetic pattern, not a foundational law.
Right, but TDUFT elevates it to the central recursion operator for all existence. The paper defines it mathematically by the quadratic equation x squared minus x minus 1 equals 0.
So in the architecture of TDUFT, the golden ratio is completely stripped of its aesthetic romance.
Totally. It is repurposed as an active, hard math, dimensional operator.
What does that mean in practice?
It's the geometric engine that dictates how energy and structural information step down from the highest proposed dimension, D8, which the text refers to as the ether origin.
So it steps down from D8 into the lower dimensions where physical matter actually resides.
Exactly.
It acts like a cosmic compression algorithm.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Because if you have this massive infinite energy state at the D8 origin, you can't just drop it directly into a 3D physical universe. It would obliterate everything.
It would be pure chaos. The golden ratio is the mathematical step-down transformer.
Like stepping down high voltage for a residential house.
Precisely. It safely compresses the data of the universe, stepping it down tier by tier, ensuring that higher dimensional energy translates into our reality as stable, structured physics rather than chaotic noise.
So to manage this descent, the theory introduces the unified dimensional operator, or UDO. And the UDO utilizes the golden ratio to converge on the physical constants we observe through a mechanism the text calls controlled harmonic leakage.
Controlled harmonic leakage.
That's a great term. But that implies our universe isn't a sealed, self-contained box. It's porous.
Highly porous, but governed by absolute mathematical rigor.
So things are leaking in from the higher dimensions.
Yes. The physical constants we measure, like Planck's constant or the gravitational constant, they are not arbitrary numbers. They are the highly specific amounts of mathematical leakage that successfully permeate down into our dimensional tier.
Oh, wow. So they aren't fundamental, they're leftovers.
Leftovers of a geometric process. The text explicitly highlights the D6 tier as a crucial, massive bridge.
D6, okay.
It claims that all Planck scale quantities, which form the bedrock of our quantum mechanics, emerge at this D6 level.
So there are resonant projections filtering down from the operators above them.
Right.
Meaning quantum mechanics isn't the bottom floor of reality, it's just the shadow cast by the D6 bridge.
Exactly.
This entire framework is basically a fractal universe. Because in standard physics, you have general relativity handling massive things like planets and black holes.
And quantum mechanics handling tiny things like quarks.
Right, and they famously refused to integrate. They looked like two entirely different jigsaw puzzles shoved into the same box. But TDUFT claims they are just different scales of the exact same geometric fractal.
Because the pieces aren't scattered and they aren't incompatible, they are grown from the exact same mathematical seed.
So if the logic holds, the rules that govern the D8 descent must be universally applicable all the way down to the behavior of a single photon.
And that brings us to the ultimate stress test of this theory.
The speed of light.
Yes. If the universe truly operates via a mathematical compression algorithm cascading down a golden ratio lattice, that geometry has to be able to dictate the universe's ultimate speed limit.
It has to derive the speed of light from scratch with no cheating.
Exactly. This is where the manuscript transitions from a philosophical framework into hyperspecific mathematics. They introduce an equation referred to as the speed of light codex.
Okay, let's visualize this codex together. Because instead of measuring light bouncing between mirrors, TDUFT builds the speed of light like a geometric recipe.
A recipe with zero empirical inputs.
Right. The equation claims that C equals exactly 2 plus the inverse of the golden ratio plus the inverse of the golden ratio squared.
And then minus a tiny leakage variable called epsilon.
Right, minus epsilon. You take all of that and you multiply it by 10 to the power of 8.
Which is radically different from the standard model, where C is just a flat integer, 299,792,458.
Just a number on a page.
Yeah. But in the codex, every single operator and integer in that formula represents a distinct physical geometric mechanism in the dimensional lattice.
Okay, so let's break the recipe down for you listening, because this is where the theory gets its teeth.
Let's do it.
The formula starts with the number 2. What physical reality does the number 2 represent?
So the text defines 2 as the D2 photon plane. In this model, light fundamentally propagates along a two-dimensional planar structure.
Meaning it's flat.
Yes. It lacks a third spatial dimension, which is actually critical for understanding why it behaves the way it does later during photoelectric interactions.
Okay, so we have the base of 2 for the photon plane. Following the 2, we add the inverse of the golden ratio and the inverse of the golden ratio squared. So phi to the -1 plus phi to the -2.
And if you do the math on those two inverse harmonics, they sum perfectly to 1.
Oh, really?
Yeah, exactly 1. The manuscript states this represents the harmonic recursion linking the photon plane to the mass tier.
So it's building a bridge.
Right. When you combine this 1 with the base 2 of the photon plane, you reach a base value of 3. The text calls this the Trinitarian D3 volumization threshold.
So we are mathematically folding a 2D plane into a 3D volume.
Exactly.
And then the equation multiplies this entire structure by 10 to the 8th power.
Which perfectly maps back to the 8-layer recursive descent from the D8 ether origin we talked about earlier.
So the energy descends through 8 levels of reality, intersects with the D2 photon plane, and undergoes golden ratio recursion toward a 3-dimensional threshold.
You've got it.
But wait, if we just run that math 3 times 10 to the 8th, we get exactly 300,000 meters per second.
Which is close to the speed of light, but it's not exact.
Right, the actual measured speed is slightly slower. It's roughly 299.79 million.
And that brings us to the final and maybe most important piece of the codex recipe, the epsilon.
Because the equation subtracts epsilon, what is generating this resistance? Why isn't it perfectly 300 million?
This is where the theory solidifies its claim of having 0 free parameters. Epsilon is calculated at approximately 0.00007542.
Which feels like it could just be a fudge factor.
It looks like one, right. But it is not a fudge factor manually inserted to make the math hit the empirical number. The text rigorously defines epsilon as an infinite dimensional attenuation series.
Ah, this is the harmonic leakage we talked about.
Yes. As energy drops through the higher dimensions, there is a microscopic harmonic decay leaking into the system. It's friction.
Geometric friction.
Exactly. And the paper includes a massive convergence proof demonstrating that this infinite attenuation series rapidly stabilizes and purifies into a finite exact value after exactly 20 mathematical iterations.
Wait, so it derives the exact friction amount purely from the geometry?
Yes. When you subtract this precise geometric decay from the 300 million base, you arrive at the exact empirically measured speed of light.
Down to the single meter per second.
Down to the exact integer.
Okay, the implications of this are staggering. I mean, for you listening, think about what this means. If the speed of light is not just a random velocity that photons happen to prefer, but an absolute structural necessity dictated by an 8-layer geometric descent and infinite dimensional friction.
It means the vacuum of space isn't actually empty.
Right. It forces a complete redefinition of what a vacuum is.
Yeah.
Because standard physics primarily treats a vacuum as a void, right? Like a stage upon which particles just move around.
Yeah, quantum field theory adds virtual particles popping in and out, but TDU-FT replaces the void entirely. It replaces it with a golden ratio medium.
It implies space itself is a material. Like how sound waves require the physical medium of water or air to travel, light requires a structured lattice.
Exactly. The paper explicitly assigns the vacuum a specific Poisson ratio of approximately 0.191.
A Poisson ratio. That is an engineering term.
It is.
Like if you compress a block of rubber, it bulges out on the sides. The Poisson ratio measures that exact structural deformation. To assign a deformation ratio to empty space means space is a physical geometric crystal.
Space is a lattice that resists, deforms, and interacts with energy. Light travels at 299,792,458 meters per second because that is the maximum rate at which this specific golden ratio crystal can propagate the D2 energy wave.
While simultaneously bleeding off the epsilon attenuation.
Exactly. It is physically negotiating with the architecture of the universe.
Okay, so if light is constrained by negotiating with this geometric crystal, what happens when it hits a roadblock? Like, how does this energy actually interact with matter?
Which is the core of the photoelectric effect.
Right, because if we are going to understand that effect, which is entirely about light hitting a metal plate and kicking out an electron, we have to know what the metal plate actually is in this model.
And this leads us into arguably the most paradigm-shattering section of the whole text. Before TDU-FT can reevaluate how light ejects an electron, it forces us to redefine the very nature of matter itself.
The manuscript introduces what it calls the mass identity.
Yeah.
It argues that mass is not a fundamental property of reality.
Consider how completely that upends modern science. I mean, in standard particle physics, Mass is inherent.
A quark has mass, an electron has mass.
Right, it is a given property of the particle. But TDUFT strips mass of its fundamental status and reclassifies it as a downstream emergent phenomenon.
So mass doesn't exist on its own.
Mass is simply a geometric event resulting from what the text calls a volumetric closure or a permission spike.
A permission spike. That sounds like a digital firewall granting access to a network. Like, if you have the right security credentials, the gate opens.
It's a perfect analogy. It's a physical manifestation of a geometric threshold.
And the core governing equation provided for this is m equals c cubed times t over g.
Or, alternatively, when localized to the photon plane, it is expressed as m equals c times g times t divided by d squared.
Okay, let's translate these variables so we don't get lost in the algebra. M is mass.
Right.
C cubed represents that Trinitarian amplification of velocity we saw in the codex, right? The geometric folding into 3 dimensions.
Exactly.
Then T is defined as the time density operator. And G, which we usually think of as gravity, is defined here strictly as gravitational inversion, calculated as 1 over T to the 4th power.
Right.
But wait, if G is just an inverse function of T, that implies gravity isn't a fundamental force pulling things together. Gravity is just a local variation in how dense time is on the geometric lattice.
Precisely. Gravity and mass are both just expressions of time density interacting with the dimensional architecture. Let's look at how this manifests mechanically at the D2 to D3 transition boundary. Photons, as we discussed, are bound to the D2 planar structure.
Right, they are mathematically two-dimensional, which is why standard physics observes them as completely massless. They have no volume.
But they carry energy. And when a photon's energy reaches a highly specific harmonic resonance against the lattice, it triggers the D2 to D3 permission gate.
The firewall opens.
Yes. The energy is forced to acquire volumetric closure. It balloons outward from a flat 2D plane into a fully enclosed 3D geometric structure.
It inflates into the 3rd dimension.
And that sudden 3D volumetric expansion creates massive resistance against the Gordon ratio medium of the vacuum.
That structural drag we talked about.
Exactly. That resistance, that geometric drag on the lattice is what human beings observe and measure as mass, or inertia. Mass is literally just the artifact of crossing into the 3rd dimension.
Okay, I have to put up a massive roadblock here.
Yeah.
Because the idea that mass is just a permission gate clicking open is theoretically elegant, sure, but it sounds like it totally ignores half a century of heavy particle physics.
How so?
Look at what they do at CERN with the Large Hadron Collider. They built a 27-kilometer subterranean ring, smashed protons together at nearly the speed of light, and they actually discovered the Higgs boson.
Right, the God particle.
Yeah, and the entire point of the Higgs field in standard physics is that it grants mass to fundamental particles.
Yeah.
So how can TDUFT just hand-wave away the God particle in favor of this golden ratio permission gate?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. The manuscript does not handwave the Higgs boson at all. In fact, it utilizes CERN's own data as its ultimate proof of concept.
Really?
The text claims that this exact D2 to D3 permission gate mathematics, the m equals c cubed times t over g equation, flawlessly and independently predicts the mass of the Higgs boson resonance.
Hold on. Predicting the Higgs at roughly 125 eV is the holy grail. Are we entirely sure this isn't just retrofitted math? Like, did Duca simply reverse engineer the golden ratio equations to spit out CERN's exact experimental measurement?
It's a fair question, but the author explicitly denies retrofitting. The text asserts that this prediction follows rigorously and inevitably from setting the D3 volumetric closure at the minimum energetic threshold of the recursive lattice.
So it's an organic result of the math.
Exactly. When you apply the vacuum velocity clause and the D2 gate parameters at the electroweak scale, the equation organically yields a mass resonance of approximately 125.1 GeV.
Which is incredibly close to CERN's exact observation.
It essentially matches the observation perfectly.
But if the math is legitimate, it means the Higgs boson is not a magical independent particle swimming through a viscous field granting mass to things.
No, the Higgs boson is simply the maximum resonant frequency of the D3 door clicking open.
Unbelievable. So it unites cosmic scale time density, gravity, and quantum scale mass under a single unified geometric roof.
The Higgs isn't a particle. It's the sound of the dimensional gate slamming shut.
That is a profound recontextualization of experimental data. And armed with this redefinition of reality where, the vacuum is a lattice, light is a cascading geometric descent, and mass is an emergent 3D firewall, we finally possess the vocabulary required to look at Einstein's Nobel Prize-winning work.
Which is why the structure of the manuscript was so critical. If you start the debate at the photoelectric effect, you are just bogged down arguing over the material properties of zinc and copper plates.
Right.
But by establishing the universal architecture first, the photoelectric effect ceases to be an isolated quantum mystery. It becomes a highly logical, predictable downstream consequence of the D2 to D3 gate.
So let's review the standard photoelectric effect quickly, just to see how drastically TDUFT changes the narrative.
Good idea.
In classical physics, you shine a high-frequency light like ultraviolet light onto a piece of metal. If the light hits a certain energy threshold, it kicks electrons out of the metal.
And Einstein's genius was realizing that light wasn't acting like a continuous wave here, but like a stream of localized particles, or photons.
A photon hits an electron, imparts its energy, and if that energy is greater than the work function, basically the glue holding the electron to the metal, the electron breaks free.
Right. The Standard Model treats this as an empirical kinetic exchange, like billiard balls. The work function is viewed purely as a material property. Copper has a different work function than aluminum. It is a measured, observed barrier.
But TDUFT completely reframes the event. The paper introduces the TDUFT true equation for the photoelectric effect, and it immediately abandons the idea of a simple kinetic collision.
Because there are no fundamental particles to collide, the new equation integrates the D2 to D3 dimensional gate parameters, the full speed of light codex, including the phi harmonics and the epsilon leakage, and it radically redefines the work function.
The text labels the work function as phi sub D2.
Yes. It asserts that it is not just an empirical property of a specific metal, but a golden ratio geometric operator tied to the charge plane binding.
Okay, this shifts the fundamental ontology of what an electron actually is in this scenario, because TDUFT is essentially claiming that the electron isn't just a pre-existing billiard ball sitting inside the copper matrix waiting to be physically struck and knocked loose by a photon cue ball.
Exactly. The manuscript describes the event as a dimensional birthing.
A birthing.
Yes. The threshold frequency of the incoming light is not just overcoming physical atomic glue. The frequency represents the exact energetic moment that the D2 photon recursion triggers the D3 volumetric closure at the boundary plane of the lattice.
Wait, if I'm translating this correctly, the photon doesn't hit an electron. The photon becomes the electron by colliding with the dimensional boundary and inflating into 3D space.
That's it. The interaction of the photon's D2 geometry with the lattice's threshold dynamically manifests the mass and charge of the electron in real time.
It inflates it into existence.
The electron's mass is birthed directly from the permission spike. The text explicitly refers to the ejected electron as a photoelectron boundary particle.
It unifies light, charge, and mass into a single, continuous, recursive event.
It completely eliminates the dualistic idea of energy over here and matter over there.
Energy is just matter that hasn't crossed the D3 boundary yet.
Beautifully said.
But where does this leave Einstein? I mean, E equals mc squared is the cornerstone of modern physics, the most famous equation ever written. Does TDUFT suggest we just erase it from the textbooks?
Well, no. The manuscript does not advocate for erasing Einstein because the math functionally works for our current engineering needs.
Right, we use it every day.
But it heavily demotes it. The text classifies Einstein's physics, including E equals mc squared, as a low-energy projection.
A low-energy projection. So it's measuring the artifact, not the source.
Imagine holding a solid, three-dimensional cylinder. If you shine a light on it horizontally, the shadow it casts on the wall is a flat rectangle.
Right.
If you shine a light on it vertically, the shadow on the floor is a perfect circle. TDUFT claims that Einstein's equations are brilliantly accurate measurements of the flat 2D shadows.
They describe the rectangle and the circle perfectly.
Exactly. They are special mathematical cases that only emerge when the D2 to D3 coupling approaches a ratio of 1 and the epsilon leakage is functionally minimized. But the deeper, absolute reality, the physical cylinder casting the shadows, is the massive m equals c cubed times t over g transdimensional framework.
Einstein mapped the shadows and called it the universe.
Yeah.
That is an incredibly bold, almost arrogant claim by the author. But, a theory this radical, this expansive, could incredibly easily be dismissed as mathematical poetry.
It's gorgeous, but is it physics?
Exactly. The golden ratio, recursive dimensional gates, geometric firewalls. It sounds like a beautifully intricate philosophy. But physics demands empirical proof. Can you actually test a multidimensional geometry in a terrestrial laboratory?
And this is the critical demarcation line between TDUFT and the string theory landscape it despises. The manuscript doesn't just offer philosophy, it explicitly outlines an empirical roadmap.
Ways to actually test it.
Highly specific, mathematically rigorous methods to test and potentially falsify its core claims using current or near-future laboratory technology.
Okay, let's pull these predictions apart, because if even one of these holds up in a lab, it fundamentally rewrites the trajectory of human science.
The first prediction involves petawatt lasers.
Petawatt lasers. Those generate incredibly intense, ultra-short pulses of light, reaching power levels in the quadrillions of watts, right?
Yes. And standard quantum electrodynamics predicts that the speed of light in a vacuum remains absolute, regardless of the laser's intensity.
Light is light. It travels at sea.
But TDUFT predicts that under the extreme geometric stress of a petawatt laser, the lattice structure of the vacuum will force the speed of light to physically split into two distinct components.
Wait, a literal fracture in the speed of light.
Yes, longitudinal and transverse velocities.
And I assume the math predicts exactly how it splits.
It predicts the split will occur precisely along the golden ratio.
Of course it does.
The manuscript states the ratio of the longitudinal speed to the transverse speed will equal phi. So CL over CT equals 1.618.
Meaning the longitudinal component of the photon would be measured traveling at roughly 0.618 times the standard speed of light.
Exactly.
Let me just make sure the gravity of this is clear for everyone listening. If a university fires up a petawatt laser, points it at a vacuum chamber, and their sensors detect light propagating at 61% of C quantum electrodynamics collapses overnight.
There is no patching that. Textbooks burn. It would be an extinction-level event for the standard model.
And it's highly specific.
Very. The text provides a highly falsifiable tolerance of plus or minus 0.5%. If the split doesn't happen, or if it happens at a non-phi ratio, TDUFT's speed of light codex is invalidated entirely.
So it puts its neck on the line.
Completely.
Okay, what about the second major prediction?
The second prediction targets the vacuum itself. We discussed earlier that TDUFT redefines the vacuum as a golden ratio medium with a Poisson deformation ratio of 0.191.
Right, the geometric crystal.
Yeah.
But how do you physically measure the structural deformation of empty space?
The paper points to precision measurements of the Casimir force.
Okay, the Casimir effect. In standard physics, that's usually explained by virtual particles popping in and out of existence in a vacuum, creating a measurable physical pressure that pushes two uncharged metallic plates together.
Right. But TDUFT claims that if you push the sensitivity of these measurements far enough, or utilize advanced gravitational wave interferometry, the interference patterns will not look like random virtual particles.
What will they look like?
They will overtly reveal the highly structured geometric signature of the 0.191 lattice.
So it would look like you were measuring the physical stress strain of a crystal rather than just the static of random quantum fluctuations.
Exactly.
Wow. And the third prediction connects back to our discussion of the Higgs boson, right? The D3 volumetric closure.
Yes. The manuscript calls this photoelectric Higgs scaling. The theory proposes looking at ultra-high frequency photoemission.
So moving way beyond ultraviolet light into extreme X-ray or gamma-ray regimes.
Hitting the metal plate with massive amounts of energy.
And the prediction is
That at these extreme frequencies, you will observe threshold anomalies. Sudden resonant enhancements in the electron emission that cannot be explained by standard work function equations.
because you're pushing the boundary of the D2 plane.
Exactly. And more importantly, these anomalies will scale mathematically using the exact same D2 to D3 amplification factor that generates the 125 GeV Higgs resonance.
Because it's the exact same geometric door opening,
Right.
just operating at a different scale of the fractal.
Yes.
So it proves that a gamma ray kicking out an electron and particle collider generating a Higgs boson are mathematically identical events.
It would definitively link the photoelectric boundary to the core mechanics of cosmic mass generation.
That's incredible. But the prediction that fundamentally changes the future of human engineering, and I really want to explore the thermodynamic reality of this for a second, involves what the text calls phi helix structured materials.
Ah, yes. This represents the leap from theoretical physics to applied functional engineering.
Right. The manuscript suggests that if you engineer synthetic crystals, these phi helix materials, they could tap zero-point energy directly from the transdimensional lattice, resulting in anomalous photoelectric yields or self-charging behavior.
Self-charging.
To be absolutely clear here for the listener, is TDUFT suggesting we can build a machine that pulls infinite free energy straight out of geometric time density, because standard thermodynamics dictates that energy cannot be created, only transferred. This sounds dangerously like a perpetual motion machine.
It does sound like magic, but the manuscript does not actually violate the first law of thermodynamics. It simply redefines the reservoir of available energy.
How so?
If you structure a material's atomic lattice to geometrically align with the precise phi recursion of the universe's baseline vacuum lattice, the material achieves a state of sympathetic resonance.
Like pushing a swing at the exact right time.
Yeah, exactly. You would be operating precisely at the C-cubed threshold. You aren't creating free energy from nothing. You are extracting it directly from the immense pre-existing geometric tension of the D8 descent.
You are tapping into the waterfall of energy cascading down the dimensions before it hits the D3 floor.
That's a great way to visualize it. It's a battery that doesn't hold a chemical charge, but acts as a siphon plugged directly into the architectural stress of space itself.
A siphon to the infinite. That is the technological endgame proposed by the paper. And it actually extends this logic directly into the realm of advanced propulsion, doesn't it?
It does. The text mentions modulating local time density, the T in the mass equation, or modulating the C velocity clause to enable inertial mass control.
Let's follow the logic chain we've established today. If mass is not a permanent fundamental property of matter, but simply a volumetric permission gate,
Right.
and if that gate's resistance is strictly governed by time density and the velocity clause,
Then, if you can geometrically engineer an electromagnetic field to locally modulate those variables around an object, you can manipulate that object's mass.
you could literally dial the mass of a spacecraft down to near zero.
You would drastically reduce its inertia, potentially enabling genuine reactionless thrust.
A craft wouldn't need to expel chemical propellant backward to move forward.
No, it would simply alter its geometric relationship with the vacuum lattice, allowing it to slip through space without inertial resistance.
Reactionless thrust and engineered mass reduction. It sounds like pure science fiction, but within the rigid, hyperspecific geometry of TDUFT, it is just a logical engineering problem waiting to be solved.
These are the massive downstream implications of accepting the central premise, that the universe is an operator-derived mathematical lattice, not just a collection of arbitrary empirical constants.
This has been an incredibly dense, philosophically taxing deep dive. I mean, we have covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by examining the deep frustration with standard physics, the idea that building a universe on 26 unexplainable measured constants is fundamentally a dead end, merely mapping the shadows of a deeper reality.
And from that critique, we explored the proposed alternative, the transdimensional lattice operator equations, a highly structured, 8-layer reality governed by the Golden ratio, acting not as aesthetics, but as a rigid mathematical compression algorithm.
We decoded the speed of light codex, seeing how a seemingly random velocity is actually a structural necessity dictated by planar geometry, Golden ratio harmonics, and infinite dimensional attenuation.
We tackled the mass identity, redefining mass entirely, not as an object, but as a D3 permission gate, a geometric event that perfectly predicts the Higgs boson resonance.
And we used that entire framework to completely rewrite Einstein's photoelectric effect, viewing the ejected electron not as a particle being knocked loose, but as a boundary particle being dimensionally birthed at the exact threshold of volumetric closure.
Finally, we mapped the empirical battleground. Petawatt lasers splitting light, vacuum lattices revealing their physical deformation, and the wild possibility of extracting zero-point energy from phi helix crystals.
It is just a breathtaking piece of conceptual architecture.
And whether TDUFT proves to be the definitive future of human physics or simply an incredibly elaborate, internally consistent mathematical fiction, it forces a really necessary intellectual confrontation.
It demands that you evaluate how much of what you accept as fundamental science is truly an understanding of the universe's machinery, and how much is just highly accurate bookkeeping of its symptoms.
It requires us to abandon the comfort of the what and demand the structural why.
I love that. But I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, deeply unsettling thought that builds directly off the text's claims regarding mass modulation. In section C.2.5, the manuscript suggests that gravitational fields and physical mass are merely local modulations of time, density, and the C clause. Mass is just a geometric permission gate that can be mathematically engineered, dialed down, or theoretically turned entirely off.
Which is terrifying if you think about it.
Right. If humanity ever maps this lattice completely, if we ever build the technology to close that permission gate, What does that mean for the biological reality of us?
Hmm.
Are we permanently tied to our physical weight, bound to the gravity of this planet? Or is the human body, with all its mass and inertia, just a temporary, highly specific dimensional configuration waiting for a software update?
A software update for the human body.
Think about the malleability of your own existence the next time you feel the weight of your feet against the floor. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning the shadows.